Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of September of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And before we start with Ukraine, first of all, I would like to discuss with you another important event that took place during the previous 24 hours. I would like to talk with you about the situation in the Republic of Belarus. According to information we have today, the President of the Republic of Belarus, Lukashenko, met with Trump's representative and received a personal letter from the US President. Alexander Lukashenko met with the American delegation headed by John Cole, Donald Trump's representative. The Belarusian leader thanks the US President for his efforts to resolve the conflict in Ukraine and stressed the importance of maintaining a course towards peace. So the most important thing, according to information we have, is that the United States of America are going to lift some sanctions from the Republic of Belarus. United States is lifting sanctions on Belavia Airlines and resuming air service with Belarus, which had been closed since 2023 due to sanctions. This was stated by the US presidential representative John Cole at the meeting with Alexander Lukashenko. So what does it mean, and what is the connection to the Russian Federation in Ukraine? First of all, Russia also doesn't have any air connections with the United States of America. But now we see that as a result of this lifting of sanctions on the Republic of Belarus, we see that now the United States of America are going to restore connection not just with the Republic of Belarus but also with the Russian Federation, because from this moment the citizens of the Russian Federation will be able to fly to the United States of America from the territory of the Republic of Belarus. Of course, as for now, it's very difficult to understand how Belarusians and Russians are going to fly in the direction of the United States of America through the European Union, because the European Union hasn't lifted any sanctions from the Republic of Belarus, but obviously they will find a way. So this is very important step towards the peaceful settlement of every single problems between the Russian Federation and the United States of America, and probably this is another step towards peaceful settlement of the conflict in Ukraine as well. Now let's discuss the situation in Ukraine. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. And first, let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction. The Ukrainian sources reported that today in the Zaporizhzhia region, a Ukrainian Air Force Su-27 crashed, most likely as a result of work of Russian air defense forces. So we see that currently there is still very difficult situation for both Ukrainians and the Russians. As for the western and the southern directions, the situation is stable, but when talking about the eastern direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation. If you remember, during the previous video we were talking about two villages in this area, the village of Novonikolayevka and the village of Sosnovka. As for the village of Novonikolayevka, we have already discussed this video where we can see how Russians raised the Russian flag in the most southeastern part of the settlement, and based on this report we have adjusted just this part of the village. As of the end of the 11th of September, it's still unknown what is the status of the northwestern part of the settlement. We're talking about these three streets, but when talking about this video, we can see that there are no signs of clashes, of artillery strikes, there are no signs of heavy battles in this area, which means that either the village of Novonikolayevka is already under complete Russian control and the Russians are much further in the western direction, or there are no clashes at all. The Russians entered the settlement that was abandoned by the Ukrainians due to some shortage of manpower or maybe something like this. As for the northern changes, we have very important video published by pro-Russian resources by the affiliated channels of the Group of Forces East. Here we can see how the clashes for the village of Sosnovka have taken place since the beginning of probably this week. Lots of artillery strikes, aviation strikes, and in the final part of this video, as usually, the Russians raised flags all over the entire territory of the settlement. During this video we can see at least 3 flags that were raised by the Russian forces. One of the flags was raised in the southern part, another one on the eastern part, and another one in the northern part of the settlement. Based on this video, based on the report of different mappers, based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we adjusted the map in this area. So this is the situation by the end of the 10th of September of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 11th of September of 2025. The Russians Russians, as we can see, are taking in pincers very important and strategical area in the Zaporizhzhia direction. We are talking about this pocket, which is located between lakes, rivers, the trenches, fortifications. So this one, and the most important that when talking about this part, this is the most concentrated area with villages. So as you can see, there are lots of villages, but there are gap between villages, a huge gap between villages. And here we can see at least 5 villages almost in the same place with network of fortifications. And if Russians are able to take this territory under complete control, this is going to be a perfect foothold before further offensive operation of Russians in the direction of the settlement of Uspienovka, which is more or less huge settlement before the beginning of the battle for the settlement of Gulay Polya. So as for now, the Russians managed to get as close as possible to this pocket from the southeast. The battle for Novonikolayevka has already started, and the Russians managed to take everything before moving further in the direction of this pocket from the north and from the northeast. So the Russians continue advancing, and currently the distance between edge positions or possible edge positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation and the road R85 is already less than 20 kilometers. I would like to remind you that this road R85 is the main target for the armored force of the Russian Federation on this stage of offensive operation. First of all, the Russians want to cut these roads and to collapse the logistic of the city of Gulay Polya. After the fall of this road, the city of Gulay Polya most likely would be taken by the Russians just within several months or something like this. So this is very important offensive, and we see that the Russians see this offensive as the primary priority. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours, lots of important things happened. First of all, if you remember during the previous video, we noted that pro-Ukrainian resource of deep state disappeared. We stopped receiving anything from there, and we haven't received anything from this source almost from the 7th of September of 2025. So 4 days ago, we got the latest update of them. But most likely they are watching the Military Summer channel. When they saw our previous video, they decided to give us some changes to show that everything is okay with them. So today, on the 11th of September of 2025, they published their first changes during this period of time, and the pro-Ukrainian resources are saying that currently there are very heavy clashes for the area of Russian breakthrough that happened in August of 2025, and according to them, the Ukrainians during the previous 24, 48 or 72 hours managed to improve their positions once again. So Deep State says that the Ukrainians restored control over the village by the name of Volodymyrovka, and they managed to improve their positions around. But probably the village of Volodymyrovka itself is not so important. The most important is the gray zone or contested area. This information worth our attention. So if you take a look at changes that were made by pro-Ukraine resources, we can see huge expand of gray zone over almost till the central part of the settlement of Novotoretskaya. So the Ukrainian resources are trying to tell us that during the previous 24, 42 or 40 or 72 hours, the Ukrainians carry out several counterattacks in the direction of Novotoretskaya, and that currently there are very heavy clashes exactly from this area. So this area is marked by pro-Ukraine resources as a contested area or the gray zone, which means that first Ukrainian groups were discovered or appeared in the most northern or even in the central part of the settlement. Furthermore, if you take a look at this map, we're going to see that there is a gray zone to the south of the settlement of Razina. These changes were recorded probably on the 7th of September, so 4 days ago. According to those changes, the Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, most likely through the settlement of Novoekonomichne, managed to enter the southern part of the village of Razina. So this is approximately the gray zone according to pro-Ukraine resources. So the gray zone is much bigger. We're just talking about the most important, let's say, part. So now we see what exactly the Ukrainians are trying to achieve by these counterattacks from the south and from the northeast. We see that currently, according to pro-Ukraine resources, the Russians have just this small corridor for supply and support, and the length of this corridor is just 4 kilometers and 250 meters. The entire Russian logistic rotation, evacuation, supply and support go exactly through this short corridor corridor of 4 kilometers and 250 meters. Obviously not very well situation for the Russian forces, and if Ukrainians are able to improve their positions just for another several kilometers from the south and from the north, the Russians who are currently located in the area of breakthrough would be caught in cauldron by the armored forces of Ukraine. So this is things that we can see just on the surface. But when talking about details, first of all, we need to understand that the Russians are not the side who are currently attacking Ukraine positions. The Russians are in defense state, trying to probably save control over this territory, trying to save control over these trenches, fortifications, and of course over this main supply corridor. The Ukrainians from their side are attacking this pocket with probably the most experienced, well-trained forces that they managed to collect together since the beginning of the special military operation. And the thing is that Ukrainians currently are losing all these forces. They are losing and losing every day more and more soldiers, vehicles, the Western equipment that was Ukraine got probably during the previous months or days. Ukrainians are losing, and this is not the only area where the Ukrainians are losing forces. According to the information we have and according to the current situation, the Ukrainians are forced to fall back in the Kostyantynivka, Siversk, Liman directions, and of course in the Zaporizhzhia direction. They sacrificed with almost the entire territory of Ukraine, almost the entire line of combat contact, just in favor of this small breakthrough. According to the Siversk's understanding of the situation, this small pocket, this small area between the city of Rodinskaya, Novotoretskaya and the settlement of Kucherev Yar worth the entire Ukrainian army, but not to allow the Russians to expand these positions. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. As for the previous 24 hours, and not just as for the previous 24 hours, as for the previous probably 10 or 20 days, we haven't received almost anything from this area. And if you noted, we are changing the map almost based just on the changes of different mappers, of neutral mappers, of pro-Russian mappers or pro-Ukraine mappers. We have sometimes some videos, but all these videos show us just one picture. Either the Russians or the Ukrainians with FPV drone attack another group of forces, either of the Russians or of the Ukrainians, which means that everybody suffer huge losses, and as we can see, without significant changes on the ground. So yes, of course, there are chances that Ukrainians can cut this pocket, but nobody knows the price the Ukrainians are going to pay for this. The Ukrainian counter-offensive operation started a month ago, so obviously we need to understand that for almost nullable changes since the beginning of counter-offensive, the Ukrainians obviously suffered huge losses. Now let's move in the Kostyantynivka direction. The Russians continue their offensive operation in this area. As for the previous 24 and 48 hours, the Russians were concentrated on maintaining the lines along the city of Kostyantynivka. They were trying to cut pockets to destroy and clear some, let's say, pockets of resistance of the armed forces of Ukraine that were, let's say, left by the Russians while they were moving further in the direction of the city. As for now, the primary target for the Russians is the pockets to the southeast of the city of Kostyantynivka, between the villages of Pritechen, Alexandra Shultina, and the Siversk Donetsk-Donbass Canal. During the previous video, we already discussed this episode, how Ukrainian FPV drones were attacking Russian soldiers along these trenches, fortifications, and these strongholds. Based on this video, we came to conclusion that the Russians most likely were attacking Ukrainians in this pocket from the south, from the settlement of Pritechen, and as a result of Russian offensive operation, the Russians managed to take under control this dense network of the fortifications, which is the biggest one in this direction and which is very, very huge advantage and of the armed force of Russian Federation. So as for now, we don't know the exact status of this huge forest between the village of Pritechen and the Siversk Donetsk-Donbass Canal, but as we discussed during the previous video, most likely these coming days the Ukrainians will try to evacuate their units from this area with the purpose to reduce the losses. Now we see that the Russians probably were tasked to finish the battle for the Kliban-Bytske water reservoir. I would like to remind you that according to information we have, there are still positions of the armored forces of Ukraine to the south of water reservoir, which still have possibilities to get additional supply from the mainland, from the city of Kostyantynivka. The Russians decided to increase the number of drones above this area with the purpose to destroy any support that can go from the north in the southern direction. And this is just another episode when Russians discovered this small boat, and Russians destroyed this boat with FPV drone, and most likely Ukrainians to the south haven't received anything, which obviously will reduce chances that they will be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time. In the northeast of the Kliban-Bytske water reservoir, the Russians control the situation with drones and with artillery. During this video we can see how Russians discovered another position of the armored forces of Ukraine FPV drone operators, and then the Russians destroyed it. Furthermore, several Western resources reported that the Russians, after very long regrouping, are about to resume their offensive operation from the villages of Alexandra, Kalinova and Yablunovka in the northern direction. Most likely the Russians decided that it's better to attack Ukrainians to the north of the water reservoir with the purpose to not to clear the southern bank, because if Russians, let's say, are able to break through Ukrainian defense along N32 road, and if Russians are able to enter Ukrainian positions that are behind the water reservoir, then most likely this situation would force Ukrainians to fall back further in the northern direction towards the villages of Vostok and Ivanopolia. So we see that we are getting closer and closer to the date when Russians will answer the city of Kostyantynivka, and we are talking not about sabotage and reconnaissance group, we are talking about regular Russian army and 1st Russian stormtroopers. Now let's move to the Siversk direction, and when comparing the numbers of updates on every single direction, we can say that the Siversk direction is the most intensified area. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, we received probably dozens of videos of geolocations of how Russians were attacking with drones Ukrainian vehicles, Ukrainian FPV drone positions, warehouses, ammo depots, just positions, decoys positions, and many other military facilities and infrastructure. And lots of units are involved in this operation. So it seems that it's not just something like huge big activity of Russian forces. It seems that the Russians launched artillery preparation before the beginning of another major offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, the pro-Ukraine resources of Deep State also made changes. According to them, the Russians finished the battle for the Serebryanka forest, which is located to the north of the village of Serebryanka. So the Ukrainians are losing the ground, and some sources make a conclusion that's very likely that the Battle of Siversk will be finished much earlier than the battle for the city of Pokrovsk or the city of Kostyantynivka. It seems that very soon 1st Russian groups will enter the city, and the battle for every single building in this area will start. As for the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, small changes were recorded on the territory of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia. We are waiting when the Minister of Defense will confirm complete control over the village, but as of now we have just small adjustments. The same situation with the village of Shandrigolova. During the previous 24 hours, small changes were recorded in the southern part. As for the city of Kupiansk, as for the city of Volchansk or the Sumy direction, during the previous 24 hours, nothing special was recorded. The Russians continue hunting and attacking Ukrainian vehicles in units all over the entire direction that is in the responsibility of the group of forces north, but without significant changes on the ground. So there are very heavy clashes, but without progress. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.